Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by and welcome to the Leveraging the Power of Nurses Promoting Health Equity Through a Framework of Culture Humility. At this time, all participant lines are in a listen-only mode. After the speaker's presentation, there will be a question-and-answer session. To ask a question during this time, you will need to press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Please be advised that today's conference is being recorded. If you require further assistance, please press star 0. I would now like to hand the conference over to your speaker today, Dr. Carmen Alvarez, Assistant Professor at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, Co-Chair, Campaign for Action, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee.
Well, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. On behalf of Drs. Susan Hassmiller and Susan Reinhardt, and all of the leadership and staff at the Center to Champion Nursing in America, I thank all of you for taking the time to join us for this very important discussion today. The Future of Nursing Campaign for Action is happy to bring you today's webinar, Leveraging the Power of Nurses, Promoting Health Equity Through a Framework of Cultural Humility. Today's webinar topic of cultural humility is now more important than ever. As was mentioned, my name is Dr. Carmen Alvarez, and I am one of the co-chairs of the campaign's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee. For those of you who are not familiar with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee, it is comprised of the presidents of the national racial and ethnic minority nursing organizations and men in nursing. The committee's mission is to ensure that all people, regardless of race, religion, creed, ethnicity, age, gender, and sexual orientation, or any aspect of their identity, will experience equity in well-being, health, and the health care through a more diverse nursing workforce. Before we go too much further, I want to remind you that we are recording today's webinar. So if you miss a section or you would like to pass it on to a colleague, you can find the recording by going to www.campaignforaction.org/webinar. I now have the honor of introducing today's presenter, Dr. Piri Ackerman Barger. To save on time, I will not read her full bio, but her biography will be available on our website along with the recording of today's webinar. Okay. Dr. Ackerman Barger is Associate Dean for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and an Associate Clinical Professor at the University of California, Davis, Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing. She is also the Director of Faculty Development for Education, is co-director for the Interprofessional Teaching Scholars Program, and serves as a researcher for the Center for a Diverse Healthcare Workforce at the University of California, Davis Health System. Dr. Ackerman Barger is also a diversity consultant and advisor to the Campaign for Action. All right, so thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ackerman Barger. Please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez, and thank you all for joining the webinar today. We're going to talk about how cultural humility can be a framework that helps us move toward health equity. The profession of nursing has clearly stated values about the inherent dignity of individuals and about caring for others. However, there exists a paradox where our healthcare outcomes do not align with our values. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation uses the term culture of health as a call to action to embed efforts into our everyday practice that improves the health of others and moves toward health equity. According to Paula Braisman, health equity can be defined as a state where everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be healthier. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The cause of health disparities and health inequities is neither simple nor singular, but rather a combination of inequities that occur on the structural, institutional, and individual level. These inequities are not separate, but very linked and interactive. For example, we live the legacy of physical structures, redlining, placements of reservations, where prisons are located across the street from elementary schools. We continue our institutional level policies of inequitable hiring and pay. Women, we still don't have the same pay equity for the same work as men. We continue to use standardized tests, which we know have origins in the eugenics movement. And if you'd like to know more about that, I would recommend that you Google Carl Brigham and also find a book called The Big Test. Inequities at the individual level are based on prejudices and biases, whether conscious or not, and we're going to go further into that today. And as you're looking at the visual here, I use the term inequities to try to capture as many groups of people as possible, but you can switch some of those terms so that we're saying maybe structural racism, institutional racism, or individual racism. You can also replace the word inequities with homophobia, ableism, and all the different kinds of ableism, or isms, forgive me. Next slide, please. So how do we get from the state where we are to the state that we want to be in, which is health equity? And one of the things that we need to realize is that if we keep doing the things that we've been doing the same way that we've always done them, we're going to get the same outcome, right? So this is about trying to think outside of the box and think in new sorts of ways. Next slide, please. So I'd like to propose the concept of diversity as one of the ways to make change. And so what I'm going to do is go through the ways that we've been thinking about diversity over time. The first iteration of diversity was social justice, and social justice is still relevant. Social basically means people, and justice means the allocation of resources. So we want just allocation of resources, and that remains true. When we began to think about diversity in a new way, Diversity 2.0, we're talking about cultural competence. And basically, cultural competence is this idea that we should be able to care for people across identity groups. And then the most recent sort of thought process with diversity, Diversity 3.0, has to do with power of the people. This is about cognitive diversity, which I'm going to go to in the next few slides. I do want to credit Mark Nivet. His last name is spelled Nivet. He is the former Chief Diversity Officer for the AAMC, and he wrote an article in 2011 about the IBM analogy. If you'd like to look that up, I apologize for not citing it on this slide. Next slide, please. So this is an image of an article by Hong and Page. Scott Page is a mathematician, and he has written a book and several articles, actually 2 books and several articles, where he is making a mathematical and logical case about how a group of diverse thinkers can help inform or outperform groups of high-ability problem solvers. So if you have diversity, you're more likely to have better problem solving and innovation. Next slide, please. This is another journal article that I just found recently. It came out September 2019, which really outlines why diversity is beneficial to science. And 2 of the really important takeaways from this article was that diverse groups tend to publish more frequently and are cited more, and that diverse groups are better equipped to address health disparities, and that's what we're all about. Next slide, please. So here's the thing about diversity is that there is benefit in having people who think differently and that have different backgrounds getting together and thinking about complex problems. But here's the deal is diversity, the magic of diversity is not the default. In fact, when you get people together who have different outlooks, the default can be conflict. And when you have conflict, then you're not really leveraging the power of that thinking. So it's really important that we combine diversity with the notion of inclusion. And I'm going to share with you a definition of inclusion, which is the process by which individuals view themselves as active members of a larger community. where their background, insights, and contribution are valued as part of the creativity and productivity of the group. Inclusion then becomes the binding force for diversity. Next slide, please. So here's an interesting thing. How do we become authentically inclusive when we tend to be so separate from each other? I'd hope to bring up an image for you. If you have a moment to Google an article called "America is More Diverse Than Ever, but Still Segregated," it's from the Washington Post. And it has some really great images on it of Washington, D.C., of Chicago, of some other really big cities. And what they do is they use color coding to show different racial ethnic groups and where they live in those areas. And if we were truly an integrated society, if we were truly a melting pot, those images should look brown. But what you'll see is that there are, definitely different neighborhoods where folks of different racial ethnic backgrounds tend to live. And that shows that we're separated, and that serves as sort of a factual framework and also metaphorical, that we do tend to hang out with people that we see as being our own people. And so that makes it difficult for us to care for each other across identity groups, right? How can we authentically know about other groups of people if we're not spending time with them? So one of the things that I'd like to introduce is that cultural humility is a way to bridge that gap of separateness. Next slide, please. So cultural humility is a framework for thinking, for being, and for interacting. Through a practice of cultural humility, nurses can position themselves to engage in the kind of interactions and relationships we need to authentically learn from individuals and communities and to be of service to them. Next slide, please. This is a visual of an article. This is one of the earliest articles on cultural humility. It's from 1998, and it's by Melanie Turvalon and Jan-Marie Garcia. In the next few slides, I'd like to describe the evolution of cultural humility framework in healthcare, particularly as it was framed as a response to cultural competence. Next slide, please. So I'm giving a little bit of visual of both of the authors. This is Melanie Turvalon. She's a physician. She has a master's in public health, and she's also a pediatrician. This is a photo that I took at a cultural humility train the trainer workshop where Melanie was leading the session, so I was able to capture a picture of her. She and I both identify as mixed race, so we've had a really fun time talking about the things that are similar about us as well as the things that are different and individual. Next slide, please. This is an image of Jan-Marie Garcia. She is also a physician. She has a master's in public health, and she's a pediatrician. She teaches at the University of California, Davis Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing. She's a huge champion of nursing. She's my colleague and also my dear friend. Next slide. So one of the things that is important to understand is the genesis of cultural humility and how, for these two, it was response to cultural competence. So when you look back at some of the early writings on the term cultural competence from folks like Madeline Leininger, Terry Cross, Josefa Campina Bacote, it is clear that the original premise was that we should be able to care for each other across cultural identity groups. However, true to our nature as academics and in alignment with epistemological approaches that may be too heavily rooted in empiricism, we've focused heavily on measuring this notion of cultural competence. So it's become a metric where we try to establish mastery or competency or tangible learning outcomes. An example of how that is manifested is a test question. Which of the following foods are part of African American cuisine? And students have been starting to rail against questions like that on their exams and statements like that in their textbooks. It's very stereotyping and very linear. linear. I hate to see what the answers options are for some of those questions. And I want to share with you a personal experience. The way that I came into work around diversity inclusion was in the early 2000s, the Joint Commission was asking hospitals to focus on this notion of cultural competence. So I was serving as the director of staff development for a hospital. We had a visit from JACO coming, and the hospital asked me to review some cultural competence books so that we could display them on the shelves before Joint Commission came, and I was happy to do that. So I looked at a bunch of books, and all of them were pretty much formatted in the same way. You would open it up, and there would be a chapter on African Americans, and it would talk about what African Americans eat, what religion they follow, how they act, how they're going to be when they come into the healthcare center. And of course, I mean, immediately I was like, okay, so this is all African Americans are going to do all of these things. How does that fit for me as a mixed race person? Am I going to act like an African American or a white American? I remember looking over in the section about Mexicans. I was married to somebody who was Mexican at the time, and again, listed all of the foods that Mexicans like to eat, and very stereotypical beans and rice, tacos. And I was reflecting on how my then husband loved sushi. How does that fit into this sort of stereotype of what a Mexican eat and what a Mexican does, right? So we we very much began to stereotype and put into buckets what different groups of people do and don't do. And we've lost a lot of the really important data about individuals, about intersectionalities, about personalities, right? And so from that came the desire of Dr. Cervellana and Maria Garcia to show us a different way to interact. Go to the next slide, please. Another thing that's important to know about the genesis of cultural humility was the time frame in which it originated. So this happened in the early 90s in the wake of the Rodney King riots. And for those of you that remember, this was one of the first videos that we ever had of white police officers beating an unarmed black man. And what followed were riots and social and political unrest, similar to what we're seeing today in the wake of the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd. Like now, then there was a desire to have a connection with communities and a connection within the healthcare community as we're trying to figure out what can we collectively do to change some of our outcomes. So in response to this, back then, Oakland Children's Hospital convened an interprofessional and representative group of individuals who created what they called the Multicultural Curriculum Program. And there were three really important areas of focus that I think that you'll see as we go into the tenets of cultural humility. One of them was to appreciate the great strengths of groups of people, judgment-free history-taking in our roles as healthcare professionals, and to not focus on becoming experts on groups in a limited outward-focused way, but rather looking for the knowledge that comes from a balanced inward focus on self. And we often get this wrong by stereotyping or generalizing or taking away the individuality of people. And so, again, cultural humility gives us a framework for doing that differently. Next slide, please. Cultural humility provides a less restrictive approach than cultural competence. It de-emphasizes the pursuit of mastery. And when we think of mastery in nursing, it's like the kind of mastery you need to have to place a central line, like you want that algorithm to get from place A to place B, versus this idea of focusing more on an approach that focuses on identities, both yours as a nurse and theirs as a patient or a family or a community, including those intersectional identities and relationships and sort of a transformational pedagogy. Cultural humility also describes a way of being that involves self-reflection, self-critique, and an active pursuit of lifelong learning that includes respectful curiosity about individuals and communities. Next slide, please. So in their original article, the 1998 article that I showed you before, Drs. Turvalon and Murray Garcia provided 3 central tenets for cultural humility. However, when I sent this very PowerPoint to Jan Murray Garcia to check for accuracy and to make sure that I was capturing cultural humility in a relevant way, she informed me that they've added a 4th tenet, and so you'll see that here, and that will be included in their upcoming book, and I'll give you some information about that at the end of the slide set. But in the next following slides, I'd like to go over each of these 4 tenets that you see on the screen now. Next slide, please. So the first tenet is lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is about nurturing a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation, self-critique, and self-improvement. This requires hard inner work. And part of what makes this hard is that when we find that some of our biases or behaviors don't align with our values, it creates internal conflict as our images of ourselves are jeopardized. If I see myself as a good person, but realize that I harbor negative biases or stereotypes about a group, or even that I've been the source of a microaggression, or that I'm passively allowing systemic racism to exist, it hurts. It violates my values, and it can be painful. It can also be frustrating to think that I'll have to work on this all my life and not ever even get to this magical place of this cultural competence thing. But I'm hoping to sort of reframe this for you in the next few slides and give you some idea of how to think about this in a different way. Next slide, please. So on the first, in the red box there, we talked about the ability to self-reflect and self-critique, and that's going to be ongoing. It's not always going to be easy. The next one is about an experiential reality. So this is us trying to overcome our desire to be with people that are only similar to us. The birds of a feather flock together. We need to actively undo that. So that means that we may need to go out and look for folks that are different from us and really try to have authentic relationships with them. And it doesn't count if you're the healthcare provider and you have a provider-patient relationship, unless you're going a little bit further in some of those visits. That's not really enough to deeply understand an individual and their way of thinking and their community. And so, I just asked this question as an example for folks that are white. When is the last time you've been to a black barbecue? For folks who may be Christian or Jewish, when's the last time you've been to a mosque? For people who identify as cisgendered, and cisgendered means that the gender that you were assigned at birth aligns with the gender that you feel now. So if you are cisgendered, when's the last time you had a deep, authentic conversation with somebody who is transgender, right? And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you should go out and ask somebody who is transgender, so what's it like to be trans? Or, asking somebody, what's it like to be Asian or black? No, it's not their job to teach you, but it is, you can actively look for opportunities to learn more about others. And if there's not a representative of a group that you're interested in, consider consuming the art. And by art, I mean, yes, the drawings and paintings of, but also the music and the writing and the poetry. Folks are sharing their experiences with us, but oftentimes we're not actively reading those books or looking at those movies or listening to that music. Be an ally and be anti-racist. So being an ally means that you recognize your areas of privilege, and all of us have areas of privilege, and you use that as a mechanism for making sure that the voices of underrepresented people are heard. And let me give you an example. Janet Mock is a transgender woman of color who's written a book and very, very generously shared her experiences. And I saw her speak, and I remember she got it from a seated position, and she said, I'm tired of constantly teaching cisgendered people about the trans experience. Can some of you folks who are cis go out and talk about the experiences of trans people like I'm sharing it with you? The data is out there. And I felt like, yes, I'm happy, I can't share it from a lived experience, but I can certainly talk about this and make sure that it's reflected in our nursing curricula, et cetera. then being anti-racist means going a step further. You can't take a non-racist standpoint, because if you're non-racist and you're not doing anything, that means you're allowing the system as it currently exists to perpetuate. If you want to make change, then you need to be anti-racist, which means that if you hear somebody making a racist comment, that you call that person out, or you're actively working to change policies so that they are representative of multiple groups, and that they mitigate the racism as it's existed in our country. We need to listen to feedback and data. Folks from underrepresented communities are often sharing their stories and experiences, and yes, these are data points, and oftentimes folks from privileged groups are not listening to that or dismissing that as complaining or, something like that, but that information is out there. We just need to listen. And then the last point about this is that it actually feels good and can bring you joy when you're learning about people and groups and communities that are different from your own. And there have been studies, like when we're hearing stories or watching movies or reading books, the reward center of your brain actually lights up. They're actually stimulated. And that's what it's like when you're learning about people that are different from you. It makes you feel good. And also, when you start to find what those commonalities are with people that are different from you, that helps us with that bonded feeling, which we so much crave as humans. Next slide, please. Another one of the central tenets is the notion of redressing power imbalances, and this can be in multiple different kinds of relationships. Certainly with the healthcare provider, patient, family relationship, oftentimes we as healthcare providers think that we are all-knowing, and we know the thing that the patient or the family needs to do, and we hold that as sort of the power of knowledge, and we need to undo that. There are power differentials between educator and student, between colleague and colleague, as we're often competing with each other. You're junior faculty, I'm senior faculty. I'm more knowledgeable about this, I'm more knowledgeable about that. We don't have to have those sorts of interactions. And also with academic centers and community dynamics, where we're going in and saying, as the academic center, we're the all-knowing, and we're going to let you know what it is we're going to do for you. So next slide, please. So another important piece about redressing power imbalances is understanding your positionality and right-sizing that position to the individual, the situation, the group, etc. And understanding your positionality within a myriad of hierarchies, like within nursing or within the institution, interprofessionally and societally, understanding that you can walk in one door and have power, walk into another door and have that completely different, right? So we have to continually adjust based on the situation. And it's also important to realize that just because you share one dimension of identity with somebody, say you're the same gender or you're both members of the nursing profession, doesn't mean that your experience is the same. Even though we might both be women, I as a person of color might be having a different experience than a white woman. Or somebody, I remember working on the med-surg floor and being treated a certain way, and then going into ICU and having physicians and other healthcare members respect me or listen to me in a different way. And so it became clear to me that within different specialties of nursing, there's sort of a power dynamic that exists as well, and that our experiences are different based on our specialties. Next slide, please. The next slide is about non-paternalistic community partnerships. So using cultural humility as a framework, we can remove those paternalistic approaches. And within this, we assume that individuals from groups different from our own have wisdom and the ability to teach and learn and to problem solve and to innovate, rather than thinking that we, as a healthcare provider or an academic institution, are the holders of knowledge and the holders of power. Next slide, please. So within this tenet, it includes honoring the expertise that resides within the community. The kind of one-way flow of expertise from medical center or university is not adequate. In including the notion that we're always the benefactors and the helpers, and that we don't need anything from the community in a bidirectional sense. We have to put in structures and actions that lead to bidirectional learning. We're learning from the community. We're teaching the community. We need to look at our use of community and service learning and community nursing as curricular material, or also having uncompensated instructors. And that may not be giving the message that we want to model for our learners and to send to communities, that somehow they're obligated for free to teach us about particular communities. So non-paternalistic means we compensate organizations for teaching our students, and students understand their positions of power simply by being in the education system. There is a sense of power there. And too often we're silent as instructors about what the needs are of some of the neighborhoods. You know, like we go in and we have this knowledge that things are unequal and that there are healthcare disparities, but we're not coming out of it and speaking up about it. So students need to understand structural inequality and hierarchy and what their positions are in it and how they can change that position to, you know, obviously something more non-paternalistic. The fourth central tenet is the newest one, and it means that we parallel the first three tenets, but at the level of the institution and at the level of the organization. Next slide, please. And then one more slide. I got ahead of myself. I apologize. So we have to acknowledge that change needs to happen at the individual level, but also at the level of organizations and institutions. So organizations can adopt a cultural humility framework, which means that the policies, the practices, the decisions about partnerships and resource allocation includes the other three tenets of cultural humility. So what I'd like to do now is that you have access to a chat box at the bottom of your screen. It looks like one of those, quote, air bubbles. And what I'd like you to do, I'm sorry, if you change to the next slide, they can see what the question is I'm going to ask. Think about a movie or a book, a play, anything that gave you a deeper insight into a group you didn't know much about. And one of the reasons I do this is that it may give people ideas about books or films or anything that others might use to learn more about a population. And state what group you learned about. And as you're thinking and typing into that chat box, I'll just share an example that I used earlier, which is actually two books by Janet Mock. One is called Redefining Realness, and the second one, I can't remember the name of it, but this book blew my mind. It talked about the experience of being a woman of color, and she so very generously shared what it was like to be born as an individual that didn't feel like she was a boy. She felt like a girl. She always felt like that, and she walks you through some of those experiences. So going into the chat box, I see people sharing some films that they've watched. Precious, about child trauma. Schindler's List, which gave us insight into the Holocaust. Something called Bright and Dark. Pose, which talks about the trans community. Do the Right Thing. If I remember correctly, that is a Spike Lee movie. The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Yes, that is a seminal piece of work. The Color of Law, which talks about housing discrimination. Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies, about migrant workers in the United States. Milk, another vote for Schindler's List, and Precious. A book called There's No Children Here, Diary of Anne Frank. These are all amazing examples. Dear White People, Evicted that was such a hard book to read, but it's a really important book. So take a look in that chat box and see if there's something in there that you haven't read before or haven't seen before. And this is an example of that experiential reality. If you can't find it in a real personal relationship, here are some works that can really help you learn about other groups of people. You do not need to stop sharing resources if you're still thinking about them, but I would like to go to the next slide and into the next question. As I'm asking this question, I want you to think about this question for yourself. You will have the opportunity to use a chat to answer these questions, and you can also call in, and I might need someone to help me tell people how to call in. But first, the reflection question is, think of one of the roles you have where you're in a perceived or actual position of power. Considering that role, describe ways that you can mitigate that power imbalance to engage with others using cultural humility. So go ahead and use the chat box. If we could put in the chat box how people can call in and talk in real time. And I have some plans. I'm going to ask Dr. Alvarez if she would go ahead and share an example while you guys are typing and calling in. Carmen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ackerman Barger. This was a great presentation. So I wear a lot of hats, and I'm going to pull from my hat as a primary care provider. And in this role, patients sometimes look to me to, quote unquote, tell them what to do. So in these cases, I talk about what I believe my role is in the relationship, which is to work with the patient on their goals and be a partner with them in their care. So what does this look like in practice? It often starts with me asking my patients how I can be of service to them. I remind them that they are the experts in their health and their bodies. I ask them about what works for them considering their daily lives when it comes to planning their care. I've learned the hard way not to make assumptions. I also make sure that my body language and actions demonstrate that I am listening and paying attention, because I think it's also empowering for people to know that they are being heard and their concerns matter.
Thank you for that. There were some really important points that Dr. Alvarez made. One was, how can I be of service, right? That's a question that opens up a conversation. She acknowledges that the folks in the community are the experts on themselves and their community. And she also talked about not making assumptions and really acknowledging that sometimes the way that we learn that is the hard way. And this might be an example of listening to the feedback and the data. If you have said something and people are looking at you like, what just happened there? That's a kind of data, right? And so learn from those mistakes so that you can do better next time. There's some stuff in the chat box. If you haven't looked there yet, someone says that they're a clinical instructor and starts my first day off with, we are all students and teachers for each other. Wherever we go in life, we were always in that student or teacher role or both. Another person says, I'm a faculty member and I never sit across a desk from a student. I sit on the same side of the table. That's like one of those basic, easy things that we can do. We can do that as healthcare providers too. We don't need to stand over the bed or over the examination table. We can sit down and have authentic conversations with folks. So Scott is telling, if you want to call in, if you'd like to respond to this reflection question live on the call, you press *1. Another person says, using my influence on our Washington National Action Coalition to develop actionable anti-racist strategies in our upcoming visioning session. That sounds wonderful. Another person says, sharing with a person how you also may have been in the less powerful role and what you might have thought about in that role before you came to the perceived or actual position of power. Yeah, so acknowledging that you've maybe been in that place before. I don't know if any of you have ever waited tables before, but I feel like I spent many years waiting tables, and now whenever I'm at a restaurant, well, I wish that had been recently, but when I used to go to restaurants, I felt like I really understood what that experience was, what it was like, and so therefore I want to tip very well. I want to be really kind and respectful because, I've been there before, so that's great. Mission work in Haiti, spending time with the community as a nurse, but enjoying the beach with all the laughing about my white feet right? So she's going into the community, learning more about the people, the culture, and the geography there. I use I statements. I work with you or with my team as a nurse manager. Those are absolutely wonderful examples. Again, if anybody wants to have their voice heard, press the *1 button. If we could move to the next slide, we'll go to the next reflection question. So this one is about mutually beneficial partnerships, and same thing. I would love it if you guys would write stuff in the chat box or call in. I also have Winifred Quinn as a plant to answer this question first and get us started. So the question is, think of a community relevant to you that you would like to partner with to address a healthcare issue but haven't yet. Applying the concept of non-paternalistic, mutually beneficial partnerships, describe some ways that you might engage with this group. Dr. Quinn.
Thank you, Dr. Ackerman Barger. Hey, so can I use an example of how I flubbed it and then how I learned from it?
Oh yeah, that's learning right there.
Okay, so Karen Doxey, that's where I'm going, the LGBTQ community. So several years ago, I was the chair of AARP's employee LGBT group, which is called PRISM, as in terms of the rainbow. And I was introduced to some folks from the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, and I, for those of you who don't know me, I am a very enthusiastic person, typically. And so I enthusiastically reached out to these new folks, new to me, from HRC. And here I am coming from AARP. I've, the big AARP hat on. AARP in the DC advocacy world is a pretty heavy hitter. But I'm thinking that I'm coming from this modest place of an employee resource group. And at the time, AARP had just started using its tagline, Real Possibilities. And I was like, hey, HRC, there's some real possibilities for us here, right? I'm like thinking of integrating all these concepts with all these people. And I came across as too overwhelming. Like they thought that I was ready to sort of run ramshot over HRC. So I had to pull back, right? And come and redirect what I was really trying to do, which was to invite them in, because I was so thrilled to finally be engaging with an LGBT organization. And so I learned. And soon we will be here at the Center to Champion Nursing in America and the Campaign for Action. We will be reaching out to new organizations to partner with, and there will be some LGBTQ organizations, and I will be using cultural humility and more modesty in my approach when I reach out.
That was a beautiful example, Lynn. I have a question for you. How did you know that they were perceiving you as being overwhelming and potentially, taking over?
The person that introduced us let me know.
This person told you?
The person who introduced us, sort of the liaison between the two, he let me know.
And that's wonderful. And the reason I asked you about that is it's back to that data and that feedback. Like it sounds like you got the data, you got the feedback, and you listened to it. A lot of times when we get that kind of feedback, it's easy to become defensive, especially when your intention was to do something good, right? You really want to serve this community. And then you realize, oh, this thing happened. And so cultural humility is really thinking about and looking at it from the lens of another. And it sounds like that's what you did, Lynn. And that's what we need to be doing in general. I do see some comments in the chat box. Thank you so much. So, yeah, somebody was talking about the LGBTQIA+ community. Elaine says, pay community members for their time. And, this is so important to think about in a different way. We often bring people in as guest speakers to share their expertise. I have found a lot of times people are asking me to speak about diversity and inclusion. It's important to pay folks for that. When you're tapping into somebody's knowledge of, decades of studying, of experiencing, you should pay them for that. It's not up to the community to have to teach everybody else for free. Food is a great unifier, maybe meeting volunteers at a community event where food is. Not all that applicable right now, yes, and we're hoping that we'll be getting back to a different semblance of normal where we can share food again. Or maybe volunteer to work where the community is, for example, a food bank that you want to learn how to work in one. Let's see. So, Amanda, has anybody pressed *1 to respond to the reflection questions?
We currently have no audio questions.
Okay, no audio questions at all. Well, I want to thank everybody for sharing in the reflection questions. I would also like to go to the next slide and just open up the conversation either in the chat box or via audio. Oops, I guess it wasn't the next slide. This is a slide I promised you. This is the Cultural Humility book that is going to be coming out in 2021 by Turvalon and Murray Garcia. It's being published by Elsevier. So be on the lookout for that book. You'll get to know everything you ever wanted to know about cultural humility. Next slide, please. I would like to go ahead and open it up via chat or via *1. What questions, comments, or reactions do you have to this presentation or this topic? I see somebody has said, as a nurse ally, I often work in the LGBT community. Wonderful. I'm assuming that this person is not a member of the LGBT community. I like the A's that are sometimes added, which can include ally as well. Any comments, questions, or reactions that you might have? Thank you. I'm happy that you like the presentation. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Yay. And yes, just a reminder, this is recorded, so if you want to listen to it again later or share it with a friend, that's great. Yes, the word humility is really wonderful, and it really speaks to this being a practice that we have. It doesn't necessarily come easy, but we can work on that. Somebody appreciates the films and the books. Wonderful. Yes, I got some great ideas in there too, and hopefully people will tap into that resource and look at something new. Wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to Wynn.
Well, Piri, actually, before I go into closing it out, Susan Moyer asked a question, and it was before we really started populating the chat function, and it was what you were in the heart of your presentation, so you would not have seen it, but it was one of the resources that Victoria Vinton, Piri, Nebraska loves you. I love that.
Aw, thanks, Victoria.
So Susan Moyer, if you could, Susan Moyer asked about one of the resources that you noted before we started really populating the chat function. Mm-hmm. And so Susan Moyer, if you're still on, do you remember what it was that Piri was referencing that you would like to have the resource to? And Norma Cuellar, yes, you can share your thoughts. Please either press *1 or share it in the chat box.
And we do have someone with a comment or question. Participant, please state your first and last name. Participant, your line is open.
Well, while Norma is connecting, Piri, the book that Susan Moyer was asking about is the trans book you mentioned.
Yes, it's Janet Mock. I'm going to put it here in the chat box, and it's called Redefining Realness. Redefining Realness. I just need to get it spelled right, and I will put it in the chat box. Norma, where'd you go? We want to hear you.
Oh, it's not working.
And your next, you do have another question. Participant, please state your first and last name. And participant, your line is open.
I don't know why it's not working. So, Norma, if you could go ahead and type your question into the chat function, and whoever else is trying to ask via phone, if you could type your question into the chat function. In the meantime, there's another question, Piri, and it is, what cultural humility content should be included in the new nursing scope and standards of practice 4th edition?
Ooh, wonderful. Interestingly, Elsevier has reached out to us to write an entire book on this topic. I think that some of the ways that we could share this in a textbook is, one, first by defining it. And I think for students, it's really important for them to understand that they need to look up from their tasks. Like in my work with students, like just take starting an IV, like they're so concentrated on the IV catheter and the vein that they sometimes forget that that vein's attached to an arm, which is attached to a person, that's attached to a family and a community and to a society. And so cultural humility is teaching folks how to understand both the tasks, but also that human interaction part, and really to mitigate some of those some of those power imbalances. And again, I don't know if you've seen students do this when they're learning. I remember one particular student that came in and began to read instructions to a patient about how to do something, and the patient's like, oh, I already learned that. And the student looked up at the patient, just kind of stared at her, looked back down at the paper, and continued reading. And the patient was really upset, like, I just told you I've already heard that, you need to, like, regroup. So I think that with a framework of cultural humility, students will learn to interact with, to be humble, to listen, how important it is to listen. I mean, I don't know for folks out there, but I have found that when I've stopped and listened to patients, oftentimes they're right, or they've steered me in a direction that I may not have gone down to help them in their healing process. And then I would also recommend going through each of the 4 tenets and really helping students understand what their role is in each of the tenets, that this is not just material that is, oh, isn't that interesting, and oh, look, there's a framework, but that each of us are central in making that happen. And that we're central in making it happen at the institutional level as well, that, you know, institutions are made up of people. And so we can make impact in that regard. Hopefully I answered that question.
Carmen, is it okay if I keep reading the questions?
Yeah, I was just going to read one. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh, no, you go. No, you go. You go, please.
I think we might have missed one, which was, where does cultural sensitivity fit in humility?
Yes, you're going to hear lots of terms out there, and none of them are necessarily meant to be exclusive. Cultural sensitivity, I think, in many ways is similar to cultural humility, in that we're being sensitive to the fact that not all people think and feel and view the world in the way that we do. And so it's that piece about being open to the fact that, you know, let me just give you a quick example. We had a patient, I was the instructor, had some students that refused to get into the shower after she had had a baby. And the student nurse kept encouraging her, and it turns out that she was Vietnamese. And she had learned at a younger age that it was taboo to take a shower directly after having a baby. And we were so focused on this task of getting her into the shower that we kind of forgot to ask her, what's happening around that? What is your thought process? And it took until the end of the shift to realize we're harassing this poor person, and we're not being sensitive to the fact that she's got a different view on, what showering means after having a baby. So it's really about being sensitive to the fact that people may have feelings that are different from ours. Norma talked about Robin DiAngelo. She is a really important scholar. I recommend that you look for any of her books that you can find on Amazon. It's been sold out. But if you look in the chat box, Robin DiAngelo defined the term racism as an individual who consciously does not like people based on race and is intentionally mean to them. She says this definition actually protects racism because racism is not always conscious and is not always intentional, absolutely. She gives the example of a car wreck. If you hit someone in your car, they are hurt and bleeding. It was not intentional, but you still hurt them. The injured person is still hurt and needs help, and you're still accountable for your behavior. Beautiful example, Norma. Thank you so much for that. And again, Robin DiAngelo can give you lots of examples of the many different ways that racism manifests, and also what you can do if you're a person who is white, what you can do to start mitigating racism, both at the individual and institutional level. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Lynn.
Okay. So, everyone, thank you so very much. Dr. Ackerman Barger, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your insights and helping us grow. Dr. Alvarez, thank you always for being our co-lead on our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee. A big shout out to our webinar producer, Mr. Scott Tanaka. So Scott, you're doing an awesome job as normal. Thank you so much for all that hard work you do. And to the rest of the CCNA team, Jasmine for helping out today, and I see several other CCNA folks on the call. I see several AARP colleagues. Thank you to the Action Coalitions. And my favorite and probably most important thank you, in addition to Piri's sharing wisdom, is thank you to every nurse. Thank you for all that you do. Okay, so thank you. What I would also like to say is if you would like to get a copy of this webinar, it will be online probably sometime next week because of a few folks taking off this week. So it'll be online, available next week at www.campaignforaction.org and /webinars. We also highly encourage you to share these resources with your colleagues and with your friends. Thank you, Scott, for www.campaignforaction.org/webinars. And just thank you to everybody. And what I could not articulate is thank you to all the nurses. Many of you and most of your colleagues are on the front lines. And during a historic pandemic, many of you and your loved ones are experiencing it firsthand, even as patients or as family caregivers. And it's a very important time. And the nurses, you're amazing. Just so thank you. Thank you so much. Scott, I think we're ready to close it out.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good day and take care.
That does conclude today's call. You may now disconnect.